Now, we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. Now, some people will say that that's a problem. I say we're at a once-in-a-generation crossroads opportunity. And that opportunity is to fundamentally reimagine the global food system. But to do that, we need to address the underlying problem, in that there's simply not enough arable land or fresh water on the planet to feed everybody the way that we do in food-rich countries, and particularly countries like the US, Australia, and Europe. So how do we overcome this problem of having enough food to feed 10 billion people by 2050? Well, some people will say that, well, we already grow enough food on the planet. All we need to do is to redistribute that food. We just need to send it where it's needed. And that's basically what the World Resources Institute says here. Basically, if you're eating too much, stop eating too much and send it to other people. Now, what I say is, we've been telling people in Europe, Australia, and the US for decades, don't eat so much food or you will die of lifestyle-related diseases. How's that been working? And now we think we're going to tell people in food-rich countries that please stop eating as much food so we can send it to other people to eat. I simply don't see that working. Now, other people say, well, if we reduce food waste, then that's how we're going to feed the planet. And I think that reducing food waste is a really important component of feeding the planet. Now, my issue is I don't think it's going to happen fast enough, particularly consumer food waste. If we look, for instance, at the UK, self-reported food waste under all their lockdowns and COVID basically dropped dramatically. But as soon as the lockdowns finished in 2021, food waste came back up to 2018 levels. So I think, particularly from a consumer point of view, we're looking at generational change that's going to be required to address food waste. And if we look at that generationally, what that means is education of the food supply chain from farmers, restaurants, supermarkets, consumers, etc., is what's really, really important to get a long-term impact out of reducing food waste. So if I'm saying those couple of things might not work, what's the alternative? Well, my alternative is that we equitably distribute the means of production. So we don't just simply produce food using new technologies in food-rich countries and ship that to countries that are food poor. We equitably distribute the means of production. And that's viable for a lot of these new technologies because they use either very little or no arable land and fresh water. It's also viable for countries that are growing their food system because as they grow their economy and they grow socially, they can actually adopt new technologies. Now, the best example of this is actually from outside the food industry. And that is, believe it or not, telecommunications technology in Kenya. Now, in 2002, Kenya needed to dramatically improve its telecommunications. Did they go out and dig thousands of kilometres of trenches, fill them with copper wires, build exchanges, create a new handset manufacturing industry? Of course not. All they did was to put in some cell towers, make available simple smartphones, and they leapfrogged 100 years, a century of telecommunications technology in a decade. Now, why can't we do that for the food system? I see no reason why we can't apply similar logic to food. And yes, the current food system has been quite successful in feeding a lot of the planet, but it's not without its problems. We have massive resource usage, we have pollution of our waterways, our oceans and our seas, and significant greenhouse gas emissions. So we still need to do something, and these new technologies promise to deliver more food whilst not having the same level of impacts on the planet as conventional agriculture. And yes, some of these new technologies we're going to talk about, they can seem a little bit scary, but You don't want to be like this guy here. It's not that scary. So one thing we have to realise is that the only thing constant is change. And the rate of change is never going to be slower than it is today. And I first noticed this back in 2017, just 5 years ago. I started to notice many, many more articles I was reading on new food technologies. And I started to dig deeper into these technologies. I started following them. And with years of research, I've come to the conclusion that we're at the intersection of 5 exponential technologies, which are accelerated by 3 accelerator exponential technologies. And it's the intersection of these technologies that's going to drive the future of food for decades to come. And many of these technologies don't come from the food industry. They come from medicine, biotech, engineering, and more. So what are these 5 technologies? Well, they are alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, genomics, the microbiome, and synthetic biology. And our 3 accelerated technologies which are driving these exponential technologies are AI, quantum computing, and sensors, all leading to what I call the techsponential food future. Now, some people will say, wait a minute, alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, and synthetic biology, aren't they all the same? Well, no, they're not. Cellular agriculture and synthetic biology can produce alternative proteins, but as we'll see, they can do a lot more than that. And secondly, I haven't got conventional agricultural technologies or animal agriculture technologies on my model because whilst they're going to be around for quite a while, they are not going to be the key drivers to the future of food. So my techsponential future is built on 2 key ideas. The first key idea is that food is now technology. Technology is everywhere in food. It's no longer just about products and consumers. You need to take into account the technologies that are available and how those technologies are going to affect consumers and products. And a consequence of viewing food as technology is that technologies are exponential. They advance exponentially. And that's critical because we humans are linear creatures. An hour is an hour, a week is a week, a year is a year. And even though we might feel that sometimes time goes faster or slower, it doesn't really. It's all the same. So humans are linear, technology is exponential. And that makes it a difficult concept for humans to follow. So what's the consequence of these 2 key results? That's food is now technologies advancing exponentially. Food is now techsponential. And a good example of this in the food industry comes from the alternative protein, or as was called back in 2018, the new meat landscape. Back in 2018, these were virtually all of the companies globally that were making alternative protein products. That's it. That's not even 4 years ago. Sorry, just over 4 years ago. If we fast forward 3 years, that is the same landscape. Now, I've never seen such rapid growth in a new food ecosystem in all my time. We really are seeing exponential growth. And you might ask me, why are you showing me 2021, Tony, and not 2022? Can't fit them all on one landscape in 2022, or if I did, you'd be staring at coloured dots on the screen. That's how fast the industry itself is growing. So what I want to do today is just touch on the 3 food technologies that are part of my techsponential model. So that's alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, and synthetic biology. And if we look at our first category of alternative proteins, it used to be nice and easy. Animals, plants. And we let corn from the UK with their mycoprotein, an honorary plant member. But that was easy. But as we'll see, it's no longer nearly as easy just to separate out into animal and plant. We have, for instance, what's called biomass products. Now, anyone been to Australia and tried Vegemite or Marmite from the UK? Not too many takers, but anyway, that is an example of a biomass product where you just take a microorganism, you grow that microorganism like a yeast, and then you harvest the yeast, and then you use that to make a food product, like an alternative protein product. Now, this company called Arbiome, they take waste wood and turn it into food. Because when you want a tree, you only want the trunk. You don't want the branches. You don't want the sawdust. You don't want the bits you cut off when you turn a round log into square rectangular pieces. That's all you want. So what normally happens to that product? Often it's burned and not good for greenhouse gas emissions. What our biome can do is to turn that wood waste into media for growing microorganisms, which can then be treated and textured to make alternative protein products. And then we have fungi. Now, fungi, mycoprotein, one of the biggest movers in the space at the moment in alternative proteins. And this one is from a company called Nature's Find. Now, they find this in the bottom of the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park, the fumaroles, down the bottom of the hot springs. They found a fungi that would grow under those conditions. And what they've done is they've grown that organism, and then they've harvested that, and they're using that to make everything from cream cheese to breakfast patties. And one of the latest ones we have coming out is leaf protein. Now, there's a lot of green material from growing crops that really don't do anything with, or it's a low-value material. What you can now do is to take those leaves, extract the key protein for photosynthesis called rubisco, and then use that to produce alternative protein products for making food. Now, we eat green stuff, but we can't access a lot of the rubisco because it's locked up in the plant cells. But these people can release that. And then we look at hybrid products. And if we have a look at the hybrid products, this is a hybrid of algae and conventional seafood. Ocean mortadella from a company called Newfish in New Zealand. And if we move on to cellular agriculture, most people will think, say, of cultivated meat, clean meat, cultured meat, call it what you will. And yes, that's part of cellular agriculture. And one of the ways that you can make these products is to grow the cells, take the cells from an animal, grow them in huge fermenters, and then you structure those cells to make things like hamburgers and sausages and things like that. And the best example of that is actually a local regional example, which is, of course, chicken nuggets in Singapore from Eat Just. Been legal to sell that product to the general public since December 2020. And we also have other cultivated meat companies or cultivated seafood companies like Shiok Meats from Singapore, and they make seafood products like crab and lobster. But you don't just have to make unstructured products like sausages and hamburgers. You can actually grow whole cut products. Now, this is a steak that was made by a company called Aleph Farms in Israel. And you might look at that and go, it doesn't really look exactly like a steak. Completely agree with you. But take a step backwards. This is a prototype product. So imagine, with exponential growth, what this will look like in 5 years, 10 years, or even 3 years' time. Then you've got something that looks a lot like a steak. And then we have something called mammary gland agriculture. As you can see, cellular agriculture is not just about meat. What you can do here is take stem cells from milk, you grow mammary glands in fermenters, and you can grow milk without the animal. And you can do that for any mammal, including humans. So imagine what that could do to the infant formula industry that derives all its product from the dairy industry and the impacts on the dairy industry. And just to show you again, it's not all about animals. This is plant cellular agriculture, a company called California Cultured. They are taking cells from the cacao plant, growing those in fermenters and extracting chocolate components like flavanols and fat to make chocolate. And if we go to our last technology of synthetic biology, and this is basically where you take the gene for something you want to make in nature, you put it into another living organism, you grow that organism, harvest what you want, and then you use that product. And the best example, of that is, believe it or not, cheese. Who here likes cheese? Who like cheese? Yeah, no, plenty of cheese takers. Right, okay. So when you make cheese originally, you use something called rennet. And rennet was made from the fourth stomach of a 2-day-old dead calf. So back in the 80s, cheese consumption was rising rapidly, and they realised there's not going to be enough rennet or dead calves around to make enough cheese. So what are we going to do? So our friends at Pfizer, who make our vaccines, inserted the gene for the enzyme in rennet called chymosin, and they put that into a microorganism and made chymosin. And now that chymosin is what's used to manufacture cheese. And they did that in 1990. So they produced animal-free chymosin. So 80 to 90% of all hard cheeses in the world are made using animal-free chymosin, or fermentation-produced chymosin as they call it, and has been for the last 32 years. So if you've eaten hard cheese, you've eaten a food made with a product of a genetically modified organism. So who's now going to stop eating cheese because I've told them that? Any takers? Nope. I haven't had one taker in that. So just remember that one though. If we look more recently, we have a company called Perfect Day. They're making animal-free whey protein, using it in everything from ice creams, cream cheese, and even to make animal-free milk containing animal-identical whey protein. So is it animal-free or is it not animal-free? Because the whey protein, identical, but it's never been near an animal. Is it vegan? Interesting philosophical question, one that I don't want to get involved in answering, but an interesting question to think about. And the last one is plant molecular farming. What you do here is you put the gene for the compound you want into a plant, you grow the plant, you then harvest the seeds, extract what you want from the seeds, and then process the rest of the plant. And a company called Orf Genetics in Iceland is doing that to make the growth factors you require for growing cultivated meat. And they reckon that they have reduced the cost of that product by over 100 times compared to conventional methods of making that product. And the other one we've got, my favourite one here, is Nobel Foods. Now they've put the gene for casein into soybeans, growing the soybeans, taking the casein out and making cheese from casein from soybeans. They've planted the first crop this year. They raised $100 million US. There'll be products released at the end of this year. And if that's successful, next year they'll be growing lots and lots more casein-containing soybeans. And if you look at all these technologies, all of these technologies are science fact. They're not science fiction. So we have to realise that the future is actually already here. We just haven't heard about a lot of it. And what do all these technologies, though, have in common? And why are they important to reimagining the global food system? That's because they use a lot less natural resources. They use little or no fresh water or arable land in order to manufacture the products. But what do consumers think of this technology in their food? Because it doesn't matter how good your technology is, if the consumers won't buy it, you don't have anything. So I think there's a couple of interesting points here. It shows which direction this is going to take. One is my informal survey, which I did here again today, saying to people, are you going to stop eating cheese because it's made with the product of a genetically modified organism? I've asked thousands of people. Not one has said yes. Not one's going to stop. So if people see a benefit in a technology, they're likely to accept that in their food with far more likely than not. And maybe the benefit of cheese is you love cheese, but that is still a benefit. And the other signal of the direction it's going to take is the fact that Gen Z and particularly Gen Alpha, because when we look at the 2030, 2040, Gen Zs are getting a bit old by then, so it's going to be their kids, Gen Alphas, that are going to drive the future of food. They are not just digital natives, which we hear all the time. They are technology natives. So they've grown up with private companies shooting rockets into space. Spot the dancing dynamic Boston Dynamics robot, who, if you go to Singapore, apparently will tell you to start social distancing and not be so close to each other. And electric cars, internet, streaming, mobile phones, you name it, they don't know any other reality. And so research has shown that Gen Zs and Gen Alphas are far more likely to accept a high level of technology used to make their food than any previous generations. And I think that's particularly important in this region, because when we look at mid-2030 to late 2030, what we're going to see is that the largest cohort of Gen Z and Gen Alpha on the face of the planet is going to be in Asia. So what I say is, as goes Asia, so goes the rest of the world. But what will the future look like for these consumers? So it might look a little bit like this. This is a video from a concept restaurant called Sushi Singularity in Tokyo. So in just 77 seconds, we're going to see how this could play out in real life. So Walter Davis goes to Sushi Singularity for a meal. As he enters the restaurant, facial recognition software identifies him. The restaurant AI downloads his nutritional data from Walter's personal quantum-powered AI. He's greeted personally. He then orders his food. The nutritional data is then sent to the 3D printer, which selects ingredients from cellular agriculture, conventional agriculture, and synthetic biology, and it 3D prints a personalised product for him. And then that product is served with a flourish. Now, this simple scenario brings together our three food technologies: alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, and synthetic biology, merges it with genomics, the microbiome, and AI. He tries the product, and of course, it's delicious. And the thing is, this scenario is built on extensions of technologies that exist today. So by 2050, or even before, this could play out seamlessly in everyday life. So, where are all these technologies leading us? And that we just have to look at 10 billion people. So, how are we going to feed those people? So, the thing is that we are going to need to scale up our alternative protein technologies. And that is going to take time, because we tend to overestimate how quickly change will happen, but we do underestimate the amount of change that will happen. So we need time, and I think that's going to take decades to scale up the raw materials, the ingredients, and the manufacturing capacity to actually meet the demands of 10 billion people. And that's why conventional animal agriculture is not going anywhere for quite a while. But the bright side of all of these technologies is this is the most exciting time to be in the food industry I have seen in over 30 years. And one thing that's certain, it's only going to get more and more exciting. I can also assure you that we barely scratched the surface today of the new technologies that are driving the future of food. So, going back now to our crossroads opportunity. We can reimagine the global food system. We have the technologies sustainably and equitably feed people in 2050. But what we need to do with our new technologies is to make sure that we equitably distribute the means of production, not just the food output. And by combining our new technologies with conventional technologies, we can create a whole new sustainable and equitable global food system. It can be done. 10 billion opportunities from 10 billion people. Thank you.